Let's deal with the abuse first.
You're moving closer to eliminating the filibuster. Is that correct?
I answered your question.
You also just made some news by saying that you are going to run for re-election.
I said that is my expectation.
So is that a yes, that you are running for re-election?
Look, I don't know where you guys come from, man. I've never been able to travel. I'm a great respecter of fate. I've never been able to plan 3.5 years ahead for certain.
And if you do run, will Vice President Harris be on your ticket?
I would fully expect that to be the case. She's doing a great job. She's a great partner. She's a great partner.
And do you believe you'll be running against former President Trump?
Oh, come on. I don't even think about it. I have no idea. I have no idea whether it'll be a Republican Party. Do you? I know you don't have to answer my question, but I mean, do you? I mean, look, this is the way I view things. I become a great respecter of fate in my life. I set a goal that's in front of me to get things done for the people I care most about, which are hard-working, decent American people who really having it stuck to them. I want to change the paradigm. I want to change the paradigm. We start to reward work, not just wealth. I want to change the paradigm. If you notice, don't you find it kind of interesting that my Republican friends were worried about that the cost and the taxes that had to be had, if there is any tax to be had as they talk about it, in dealing with the act that we just passed, which puts money in people's pockets, ordinary people? Do you hear them complain when they passed close to $2 trillion Trump tax cut, 83% going to the top 1%? Do you hear them talk about that at all? I love the fact that they found this whole idea of concern about the federal budget. It's kind of amazing. When the federal budget is saving people's lives, they don't think it's such a good idea. When the federal budget is feathering the nest of the wealthiest Americans, 90 of the Fortune 500 companies making billions of dollars, not paying a cent in taxes, reducing taxes to the point that people who are making, if you're a husband and wife, a school teacher, and a cop, you're paying at a higher rate than the average person making $1 billion a year is. Something's wrong. Their newfound concern. I'm concerned. Look, I meant what I said when I ran, and a lot of you still think I'm wrong, and I respect that. I said I'm running for 3 reasons. To restore the soul, dignity, honor, honesty, transparency to the American political system. 2, to rebuild the backbone of this country, the middle class, hardworking people and people struggling to get in the middle class. They built America, and unions built them. The 3rd reason I said I was running was to unite the country. And generically speaking, all of you said, no, you can't do that. Well, I've not been able to unite the Congress, but I've been uniting the country based on the polling data. We have to come together. We have to. So from my perspective, it's to me, it's about just, getting out there, putting one foot in front of the other and just trying to make things better for people. Just hard-working people. People get up every morning and just want to figure out how to put food on the table for their kids, be able to have a little bit of breathing room, being able to make sure that they go to bed not staring to the ceiling like my dad did, wondering since he didn't have health insurance, what happens if mom gets sick or he got sick. These are basic things. Basic things. And I'm of the view that the vast majority of people, including registered Republicans by and large, share that same view, that same sense of what is, what's appropriate. Justin Sink, Bloomberg.
Thanks, Mr. President. I wanted to ask about your relationship with China now that you've been in office for a couple months. There's obviously the meeting in Alaska that was a little theatrical, and there's the continued human rights abuses. So today, I'm wondering, are you more likely than you were when you came into office to maintain tariffs on China? Are you considering banning imports of forced labor products? And would you consider cutting off U.S. investment or Chinese access to international payment systems?
Well, look, they're each specifically legitimate questions, but they only touch a smidgen of what the relationship with China really is about. I've known Xi Jinping for a long time. Allegedly, by the time I left office as vice president, I had spent more time with Xi Jinping than any world leader had, because President Obama and the Chinese President Hu decided we should get to know one another, since it was inappropriate for the President of the United States to spend time with the Vice President of another country. But it was obvious he was going to become the new leader of China. So I spent hours upon hours with him alone with an interpreter, my interpreter and his, going into great detail. He's very, very straightforward. Doesn't have a Democratic with a small d bone in his body, but he's a smart guy. He's one of the guys like Putin who thinks that autocracy is the wave of the future. Democracy can't function in an ever complex world. So when I was elected and he called to congratulate me, I think to the surprise of the China experts who were his people on the call as well as mine listening, we had a 2-hour conversation for 2 hours. And we made several things clear to one another. I made it clear to him again, what I've told him in person on several occasions, that we're not looking for confrontation, although we know there will be steep competition. 2, that we'll have strong competition, but we'll insist that China play by the international rules. Fair competition, fair practices, fair trade. Thirdly, in order to compete effectively, I indicated that we're going to deal with China effectively. And we're going to need 3 things to do that. I'm telling our people. First, we're going to invest in American workers and American science. I said that all through the campaign. I say it again, and I'm setting up my administration to be able to do that, which is that, you know, back in the 60s, we used to invest a little over 2% of our entire GDP in pure research and investment in science. Today, it's 0.7%. I'm going to change that. We're going to change that. The future lies in who can, in fact, own the future as it relates to technology, quantum computing, a whole range of things, including the medical fields. And so, what I'm going to do is make sure we invest closer to 2%. One of the reasons why I've set up the PAB, the President's Board with scientists and the like, again, is we're going to invest in medical research, cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, the things, industries of the future, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotech, and we're going to make real investments. China is out investing us by a long shot because their plan is to own that future. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to reestablish our alliances, and I've been very clear with them. It's not anti-Chinese, and we've talked about it. I want to make sure that, for example, later today, after this, as a matter of fact, shortly after this, which is fine, we're going close to an hour. I'm happy to go longer, but one of the things that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be speaking with 27 heads of state in Europe. And very shortly, I think within the next hour or so, I don't know the exact time. And earlier this month, and apparently it got the Chinese attention, that's not why I did it, I met with our allies and how we're going to hold China accountable in the region. Australia, India, Japan, and the United States, the so-called Quad. Because we have to have democracies working together. Before too long, I'm going to invite an alliance of democracies to come here to discuss the future. And so we're going to make it clear that in order to deal with these things, we are going to hold China accountable to follow the rules. Whether it relates to the South China Sea or the North China Sea or the agreement made on Taiwan or a whole range of other things. And the third thing, and the thing that I admire about dealing with Xi is he understands, he makes no pretense about not understanding what I'm saying any more than I do him. I pointed out to him, no leader can be sustained in his position or her position unless they represent the values of the country. And I said, Mr. President, as I've told you before, Americans value the notion of freedom. America values human rights. We don't always live up to our expectations, but it's a value system. We are founded on that principle. And as long as you and your country continues to so blatantly violate human rights, we are going to continue in an unrelenting way to call to the attention of the world and make it clear what's happening. And he understood that. He made it clear that no American president, at least one did, but no American president ever backed down from speaking out of what's happening to the Uyghurs, what's happening in Hong Kong, what's happening in country. That's who we are. The moment a president walks away from that, as the last one did, is the moment we begin to lose our legitimacy around the world. It's who we are. So I see stiff competition with China. China has an overall goal, and I don't criticize them for the goal, but they have an overall goal to become the leading country in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and the most powerful country in the world. That's not going to happen on my watch, because the United States is going to continue to grow and expand.
All right, just to follow up on the meeting of democracies, is that where you expect in a multilateral way to make these decisions about sanctions or
No, that's not where I make the decision. That's where I make sure we're all on the same page. All on the same page. Look, I predict to you, your children or grandchildren are going to be doing their doctoral thesis on the issue of who succeeded, autocracy or democracy. Because that is what is at stake. Not just with China. Look around the world. We're in the midst of a fourth industrial revolution of enormous consequence. Will there be middle class? How will people adjust to these significant changes in science and technology, and the environment? How will they do that? And our democracy is equipped because all the people get to speak, to compete. It is clear, absolutely clear, and most of the scholars I dealt with at Penn agree with me around the country, that this is a battle between the utility of democracies in the 21st century and autocracies. If you notice, you don't have Russia talking about communism anymore. It's about an autocracy. Demand decisions made by a leader of a country. That's what's at stake here. We got to prove democracy works.
Mr. President, sorry, I know you haven't had a chance to address the tragedies in Georgia and Colorado. You had said to stay tuned for actions that you might take on gun control. Wondering if you've made a decision either about sending the manufacturer liability bill that you had promised on day one to Capitol Hill, or executive actions like going after ghost guns or giving money to cities and states to battle gun control.
All the above. It's a matter of timing. As you've all observed, successful presidents better than me have been successful in large part because they know how to time what they're doing, order it, decide in priorities what needs to be done. The next major initiative is, and I'll be announcing it Friday in Pittsburgh in detail, is to rebuild the infrastructure both physical and technological infrastructure of this country so that we can compete and create significant numbers of really good paying jobs. Really good paying jobs. And some of you have been around long enough to know that used to be a great Republican goal and initiative. I still think the majority of the American people don't like the fact that we are now ranked, 85th in the world in infrastructure. I mean, look, the future rests on whether or not we have the best airports that can accommodate air travel, ports that you can get in and out of quickly, so businesses decide. Some of you, if you're ever local reporters, and you found your governor or mayor trying to attract business to your community, what's the first thing the business asked? What's the closest access to an interstate highway? How far am I from freight rail? Is the water available? Is enough water available for me to conduct my business? All the things that relate to infrastructure. We have somewhere, I asked the staff to write it down for me, and they did, not for this, but for a longer discussion. We have somewhere in terms of infrastructure, we rank 13th globally in infrastructure. China is investing 3 times more in infrastructure than the United States is. Bridges, more than 1/3 of our bridges, 231,000 of them, need repairs. Some are physical safety risks or preservation work. 1 in 5 miles of our highways and major roads are in poor condition. That's 186,000 miles of highway. Aviation, 20% of all flights weren't on time, resulting in 1.5 million hours lost in production. 6 to 10 million homes in America still have lead pipes servicing their water lines. We have over 100,000 wellheads that are not capped, leaking methane. What are we doing? And by the way, we can put as many pipe fitters and miners on us to work capping those wells at the same price that they would charge to dig those wells. So I just find it frustrating. Talk about, last point I'll make in the infrastructure, and I apologize for spending more time on it, but is that if you think about it, it's the place where we will be able to significantly increase American productivity, at the same time providing really good jobs for people. But we can't build back to what they used to be. We have to build, the global warming's already done significant damage. The roads that used to be above the water level didn't have to worry about where the drainage ditch was. Now you got to rebuild them 3 feet higher, because it's not going to go back to what it was before. It'll only get worse unless we stop it. There's so much we can do. Look at all the schools in America. Most of you live in the Washington area now, but in your hometowns, I don't know where you're all from. How many schools where the kids can't drink the water out of the fountain? How many schools are still in a position where there's asbestos? How many schools in America we're sending our kids to don't have adequate ventilation? How many homes, buildings, office complexes are wasting billions of barrels of oil over time because they can't hold in the heat or the air conditioning, because it's leaks through the windows that are so porous and the connections. It's amazing. So there's so much we can do that's good stuff, makes people healthier, and creates good jobs. And I think that I got one more question here. And Janet from Univision.
Thank you, Mr. President. We too have been reporting at the border, and just like Cecilia, we ran into a pair of siblings who came in on Monday.
I agree.
Came by CBP, had the phone number for their mother who lives in the U.S. We have contacted the mother. That's the only way they know her kids are here, because CBP today, Thursday, has not contacted that mother. So when can we expect your promise of things getting better with contacting and expediting?
Well, they're already getting better, but they're going to get real. They're going to a whole hell of a lot better real quicker. We're going to hear some people leaving. Okay? We can get this done. We're going to get it done. I had a long meeting with the entire team and several cabinet level officers the other night. We're going to be moving within the next week over 100,000, 1,000 people out of the Border Patrol into safe, secure beds and facilities. We're going to significantly ramp up. We're already out there contacting everyone from getting some of the employees at HHS. There's a lot of them doing other things and move them into making those calls. We're in the process of rearranging and providing for the personnel needed to get that done. But I admire the fact that you were down there, you're making the calls yourself. It's real. The next thing that has to happen, though, as you well know, has to happen. There have to be some certitude that this is actually mom, dad, or whomever. And there's ways to do that. There's ways to do that, a little bit like determining whether or not you got the right code for your credit card. What was your dog's name, kind of thing. I'm being a bit facetious, but not really. And also seeking harder data from DNA to birth certificates, which takes longer. So I want to do this as quickly, as humanly possible, and as safely as possible.
Well, no, treating the root causes in Latin America doesn't change things overnight. How do you realistically and physically keep these families from coming to the U.S. when things will not get better in their countries right away?
Well, I can't guarantee that, but I know, that old thing, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. You know as well as I do. You cover it. You have it's not like somebody sitting on a hand-hewn table in Guatemala, somewhere in Mexico or in Guadalupe saying, I got a great idea. Let's sell everything we have. Give it to a coyote. Have them take our kids across the border into a desert where they don't speak the language. Won't that be fun? Let's go. That's not how it happens. People don't want to leave. When my great-grandfather got in a coffin ship in the Irish Sea, expectation was he going to live long enough on that ship to get to the United States of America. But they left because of what the Brits had been doing. They were in real trouble. They didn't want to leave, but they had no choice. So I can't guarantee we're going to solve everything, but I can guarantee we can make everything better. We can make it better. We can change the lives of so many people. And the other thing I want to point out to you, and I hope you point out, I realize it's much more heart-wrenching, and it is, to deal with a 5 and 6 and 7-year-old. But you went down there and you saw the vast majority of these children, 70% are 16 years old, 17 years old, and mostly males. Doesn't make it good, bad, or indifferent, but the idea that we have tens of thousands of kids in these god-awful facilities that are really little babies crying all night. There's some, that's true. That's why we got to act. And yesterday, I asked my team, both the director of the two agencies as well as others, I asked them what would they in fact, and I asked their opinion because they're the experts, but I said, focus on the most vulnerable immediately. But there's no reason why in the next month as people cross the border, that phone call can't be made in the first 48 hours and begin.
If I may ask one last question, have you had any talks with Senate Republicans who are threatening this administration with not considering the immigration legislation that was passed in the House until the situation at the border has been resolved?
No, because I know they have to posture for a while. They sort of got to get it out of their system. This is but I'm ready to work with any Republican who wants to help solve the problem or make the situation better. But folks, I'm going. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst, and democracy is fragile, and its essence is also its greatest vulnerability. It depends on public support for its very existence. So we are in a perilous moment right now as we push to make our elections more open, more accessible, and more inclusive. And the Republicans, shocker, do not want this. Their survival is all about holding down voting by any means necessary. And in the debate over who should vote, they have the upper hand. If they win restrictions on voting, they win. And if they lose in their efforts to restrict voting, they can still win by using the debate to destroy faith in elections. That is their cynical game right now. And we must not blink, but we must also not be naive. There are two big issues on the table right now. Who is eligible to vote? And then assuring that everyone who is eligible actually is able to vote. We've come a long way in making most Americans eligible to vote, even if you don't own property, are not white, and aren't, well, a man. But on assuring that everyone actually can vote, the gap between who is eligible to vote in this country and who is actually able to vote is one of the greatest scars on our democracy with a lowercase d. The gap undermines the legitimacy of our elected governments, yet fixing it gives the opponents of democracy an opening to, yes, undermine the legitimacy of our elected governments. And that happens on both sides of the aisle. Incumbents want to protect themselves, but Republicans want to hold power when they know that the country looks very different than the way that they hold that power. So we need to proceed with great resolve, not just to win, but to explain why we should win. Clarity is essential, since the opponents of voting rights win just by creating chaos and confusion. For example, there are a number of ways we should continue to expand eligibility, like assuring that the formerly incarcerated have their rights restored. But our biggest challenge, and the one that Democrats have correctly focused on, is removing the obstacle course that makes it hard for eligible voters to actually vote. This is where Republicans are at their cynical worst. They have created a series of myths and voter fraud, and then use those myths to create obstacles to vote. ID rules, restrictions on length of voting and location of voting places, resistance to mail balloting, as we know from last year. This did not begin with the Donald Trump debacle of 2020 or the attack on the Capitol, and it clearly has not ended. Republicans are pushing in almost every single state right now to restrict access to voting. Voting has always primarily been a state responsibility. And in several places last year, Republicans had the courage to do their jobs and protect the proper counting of ballots. Republicans that they are trying to undo, these are the same Republicans that are trying to undo years of effort to professionalize the administration of elections. Shame, right? Shame, shame, shame. So I can't believe that I am quoting Chuck Schumer.
Today, now, in the 21st century, there is a concerted nationwide effort to limit the right of American citizens to vote and to truly have a voice in their own government. In the wake of the November elections, one of the safest in recent history, Republican-led state legislatures have seized on the former president's big lie that the election was stolen and introduced more than 250 bills in 43 states aimed at tightening voting rules under the guise of election integrity. Instead of doing what you should be doing when you lose an election in a democracy, attempting to win over those voters in the next election, Republicans instead are trying to disenfranchise those voters. Shame on them.
Shame on them. That was yesterday at a Senate hearing on a vital bill to protect the essential right to vote. While the Republicans are fighting state by state to restrict voting and retain their power over ballot counting, the House has passed legislation to create nationwide standards for voter access, like a simple universal registration. That is the bill that Senator Schumer was arguing for in that clip, as it is taken up by the Senate. The Republicans denounced this as federalizing a state responsibility. That is an exaggeration, but there is a kernel of truth here, and it is all on them. They've spent years and years, decades, trying to suppress voting and undermining the legitimacy of elections. It's racist, as we know. It's gendered. It's ageist. The damage that they have done is incalculable. The chickens came home to roost on January 6th, and if Republicans don't want uniform federal standards for voting, then they should back off their state-by-state campaign to suppress voting. It is that simple. And I'm not holding my breath, but we're going to be watching this closely. We have a great show today. We're going to be talking about the PRO Act and what's happening in the labor movement right now with the one and only Kim Kelly. And later we have Arun Chaudhary and Rep Rabb because it is Thursday. Thursday on the Nomiki Show. You know what's about to happen. All right, stick around. We'll be right back.
Hello, can you hear me?
All right, welcome back to the Nomiki Show. So excited to have Kim Kelly back. She is a labor reporter and journalist. She writes a labor column for Teen Vogue and is a regular contributor to The Baffler. And you have a piece out right now in Rolling Stone about workers at an indie music company beginning efforts to organize secretly, because that's how you have to do it, right?
Of course, you can't let them know what you're up to because they'll try to stop it.
But you're writing about it. So what is that going to do?
No, well, this is actually a coordinated effort. These workers reached out to me last week saying, hey, we're organizing. We want to get this out there. We don't want the boss to know about it, obviously, because we haven't told them yet. So we actually coordinated very closely when it came to scheduling. Like, I wrote it up really quick and the editor reached out for comment really quick, and then we waited for them to put out their statement. Then we're like, boom. It was like a very I woke up at 7 a.m. to make sure this all unfurled the way that the workers wanted it to, and we pulled it off, which I'm very happy about, and so are they.
This is incredible. I mean, so how does something like this go down at an indie music company? I mean, I assume it's not a very large company, so does that complicate things?
That is definitely something that came up when I was speaking with the workers. I interviewed a bunch of workers about it, and they were all in the store. They all asked to be anonymous because it's such a small workplace. Some of the people I spoke to, they're like, look, I'm the only person with my job title, they'll know it's me. So it seems like their biggest concern was retaliation, and maybe not so much I'm going to get fired, because that is ostensibly against labor law, but more insidious things like, this is the music industry where who you're friends with, who you talk mess about, like, that matters. Like, if you piss off the wrong person, that could have an effect on the rest of your career and the opportunities you get. So the fact that it was so small made it a little bit more interesting, but it's still the same process. Forming a union is forming a union. It's just all the other factors that kind of get thrown in there.
So what does that mean? Like, it's why did they decide to form a union at this company?
So they told me, which is it's really interesting to me, because they cited a bunch of events that have happened recently, and this is kind of a concrete response to them. They mentioned, the racial justice uprisings over the summer that really struck a chord. They mentioned what's happening here in Bessemer with the Amazon workers trying to organize. They mentioned, developments on the government level of Biden being so, making all these pro-union messages, and about the NLRB shakeups. It seemed like it was kind of a perfect storm. And they're also dealing with workplace issues. The company they work for has expanded very rapidly. And of course, that pressure has fallen on their shoulders. So it sounds like all this stuff swirled together, and the answer for them turned out to be union.
What union are they working with?
Is OPIU. I think it's 47 and 147. I'd have to double check. There's a lot of OPIUs, but it's like the office workers union, and professional workers. And there's a precedent there because they already represent administrative employees at Warner Brothers and some of the big major labels. But this is definitely a first for the indie music space.
That's very cool. So while we're on that topic, because I think we get this question a lot, and it depends obviously on the workplace and what type of where you work, what kind of industry it is. But how do you go about, if you're working at a company and you want to start a union in that company, what are some initial steps that workers can do?
Right. Well, I mean, the first thing you should do is to reach out and talk to your coworkers and make sure you're all on the same page. Because if just one person wants to form a union and everyone else is like, no, then that's not really going to work out. But once you talk to your coworkers and have those one-on-one conversations and get a sense that, like, okay, people are interested in this is something we need, we collectively want to fight for, then often it can come down to something as simple as just Googling, like, what's the right union for you? Like, seeing what other similar companies have unionized, which unions. I mean, even here, just to come back to Bessemer for a second, the RWDSU, the union that's representing this union drive, that was found because a worker just kind of Googled, like, what union should I try to join? Like, how do I form a union? And they came up, and he did what everybody should do. You email the union and the representative gives back. You start talking. It's all about forming relationships and talking and communication at the very beginning, right? Because you have to make sure you're all on the same page, because that's how you build something strong.
Fascinating. Okay, so it's as easy as that. Google, look it up. Unions are receptive. I've been in that role before, by the way. It's daunting.
Oh yeah, it's not super easy. It takes a lot of work, but the steps are simple. Making it happen is the hard part.
Yeah, reaching out to your coworkers, and understanding if you're in a workplace that you could actually unionize too. I mean, there's lots of other factors. Okay, so let's talk about Bessemer. You're on the ground right now, I assume?
I'm holed up in my hotel room in Birmingham because there's a tornado warning.
Oh my God. Again, another Alabama.
Again, this happened. I got here on Wednesday when Sarah Nelson came down, and there was a hurricane warning there too. I think I was one of the last flights to get in, and I got out and I was like, oh, this is different. Okay, there's a lot of sirens. There's a lot of red on the map on the TV weather, but everyone who's down here was like, oh yeah, that happens. So I'm like, okay, I guess this is fine.
Stay safe. We'll be watching you carefully. But all right, so where are we in the process? Workers are voting. The campaign's underway. The election's underway. Any updates?
Well, we're getting down to the finish line, right? Monday, the 29th. That is the last day that you can get your ballot in. And after that, they're going to start counting. Like this coming week is going to be it's going to be like the equivalent of kind of the presidential election we just had, where everyone was expecting a big result right away. And then it was like, no, it's going to take a few days. This is going to take a few days, but there is still time right now for workers to get those ballots in. So there's still this final push. There's a lot of community support. We just had a rally here the other day. On Friday, tomorrow, we have, talk about a dream team. We have Senator Bernie Sanders, Killer Mike, and Danny Glover are all coming to town to meet with workers and to support them and just be like, union, yes. Danny Glover's been here before. The workers love him. So there's a lot happening, but it's kind of more that sense of, okay, we did all the work. We're just waiting for hopefully the victory party. There's just a few hurdles in the way because there's going to be legal challenges. There's going to be the issue of counting ballots, challenge ballots. I'm not even entirely sure which day we can expect a result. Nobody knows. It comes down to the count. So it's all very a lot of butterflies in the stomach, as Jennifer Bates said when I interviewed her.
How many people are voting or are expected to vote?
So can vote. Every person who's eligible, 5,800 workers are eligible, and the ballots were mailed out. Now, not everybody received their ballot because, as one of the organizers was explaining to me, folks move around. They might not have up-to-date information. There have been returned ballots. There have been a few hundred ballots that haven't made it to people, but there are also thousands of workers involved, and every ballot counts. But it seems like, and this is just from conversations I've had, it seems like they expect a pretty good turnout. The organizers seem very positive about the results. There's not a lot of cynicism here. I know that, you take everything with a grain of salt. You never know what's going to happen, but people seem more excited than worried, I'll say.
Sarah Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants Workers, part of CWA, she had a video come out that she posted of the facilities and how the elections were being conducted and what was against the NLRB rules. Can you describe some of that to folks?
Yeah, I was there with her. We went out there. We maybe some light trespassing, I guess we'd say. But there was the day. So it was the day that we got there because there was a tornado happening. All the workers were sent home because
the tornado pushed you in there. You had it was safety.
There's a lot of wind. We're not very big. we ended up in an Amazon parking lot where we could kind of get eyes on what was happening up there. And one of the biggest, obviously you'd see in the video, there is this mailbox, and we've been chasing this mailbox story all week. There's a mailbox that was placed there by someone, Amazon, USPS. There's a lot of questions about this mailbox, but there's a mailbox there with a big tent around it with some weird Amazon propaganda on it, where workers have been encouraged to drop their ballots. That via text message, via signage, Amazon really wants them to put their ballots there. And now we don't know who has the key, which is kind of a important part of that. We don't know who's picking up the ballots, who's able to access them, and we can't get a straight answer. That's something I'm working on right now with More Perfect Union. We should have a video coming out pretty soon with some it's been an interesting story, right? But in the broader sense, Amazon is still pushing their anti-union campaign, still pushing anti-union propaganda. I'm not a labor lawyer, but there are certainly all sorts of things I would point to if I wanted to make, the accusation that they were union busting or they were not quite coloring within the lines, we'll say. Yeah, they're always up to something. It's Amazon.
So this is and I want to ask you more about the PRO Act in a second, but we're living in a situation right now where there are legal ways to union bust and there are definitely illegal ways to union bust. Where on the spectrum do they sit right now? Like 1 to 10. 10 being most illegal, 1 being unethical but legal.
I mean, they kind of run the gamut. You know, Amazon loves to innovate, so they're not gonna, you know, so like some things are more of a 5, some things are maybe a 2, but some things are like a 9.5. You know, I will be very interested to see what kind of legal challenges and legal decisions are brought after the election wraps up. I know the union is focused on just the election right now, but this will not be the last we're hearing about Amazon's anti-union practices. I can tell you that much.
What's the worst you've heard?
I mean, this mailbox is very blatant. Like that's something that is very intimidating. It's very blatant. They've been actively pushing people to use it. And there's still this question of what's going to happen to the ballots in the box. We don't know. Are they going to toss them? Are they going to play by the rules and use them? Has Amazon ever played by the rules? There's a lot of instances leading up to that, of anti-union activity, anti-union propaganda, but that's just so egregious. That's the one that I think people are paying attention to, because it's like, they're stealing the election, and then there's like physically trying to steal the election, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's a Republican tactic, frankly, where they've, same thing. All right, so after this vote happens, this is just one facility with Amazon. What does this mean? What could this signify? What kind of changes can come out of this if they win or lose, frankly?
I mean, this is going to be a watershed moment in American labor history, no matter what happens. And I'm hoping that they win, because that'll just be lighting the spark of things. That's the analogy I keep coming back to. All you need to start something big is to hit that spark, and the workers here are holding those matches. But we've already seen, I think it was Bloomberg that reported that RWSU, the union, has already heard from workers at like 1,000 workers across the country asking, can we be next? How do we do this? How do we get in on this? So people are watching, right? And once the Amazon workers here win, they will be setting that precedent that, it can be done. Not only can it be done in the US, it can be done in this environment that's so, Republican, red state, right to work, like all of these barriers are here. But if they can just hurdle over them and they can pull it off here, what's to stop workers in any other Amazon facility doing the same thing? There's not only like legal precedent, there will be kind of an inspirational precedent, we can do this. And, workers, Amazon is a global company. They have workers all across the world. We've already seen, I think that there's we've seen so many solidarity messages from workers across the country, but even there were Italian Amazon workers on strike like yesterday or the day before about pandemic safety, and just kind of, be like, hey, we're watching. Polish Amazon workers are sending messages. Like it's hard to understate how big this is, especially because it's happening here in the South, which has been written off in so many ways and has been, the labor movement here has been kneecapped and ground down so much, but it's still here and it's doing really important work, and you cannot write that off. Like where the South goes is, I think, where the movement should be going. And if they lose, that it'll be a heartbreaker, but they will still have gotten this far, and they will still have set this example, and people will see this and be like, okay, well, we got to do it then. Like we got to get to the finish line. And
they'll be aware of the tactics too, because they're throwing everything at them. And so the next place, my guess is, even though they love to innovate, they may not have innovated enough tactics at that point to, who knows? But it's simultaneously, this is happening while the PRO Act is being presented to the Senate. Where are we with the PRO Act, and why is the PRO Act so important? It keeps being labeled the most important piece of labor legislation, possibly in 100 years.
Well, because it is. We haven't had this opportunity to actually have a chance to get through this kind of big, fairly bold labor legislation in a long time, because the last president clearly wasn't going to do it. And even the ones before that wasn't a priority. We have an administration that at the very least are branding themselves as pro-union, pro-labor, and they've been publicly supporting this legislation. So it's like, okay, we actually have a shot here. And the PRO Act will actually rectify some of the issues that we have in existing labor law and make it easier to unionize, make it easier for workers to, collectively bargain. Like I would have to go through and pick out and choose all the, all the important things. I haven't been following as closely as some people because I've been down here, but it's really important. It's going to help so many people. I really hope that they force it through. Like, I don't know what kind of Senate sorcery is needed to make it happen, but I really hope they pull it off because it really will help workers in this country. And this is really something that we need because there are so many people who are left out and kind of cut off from our current labor laws, that because those labor laws are largely, they were passed in the 30s and the 40s when we didn't have politicians that even had to pretend to care about, like, how do we help migrant farm workers? How do we help Black workers? How do we help disabled workers? Like, there's so much more awareness of what the working class looks like now and what they need. We really have an opportunity here to do some good. And I really hope they don't screw it up.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, in the case of the Bessemer election right now, part of the PRO Act shortens election times, make sure that they don't have these long drawn out election processes, because what happens when these elections are really drawn out for over a month?
I mean, people lose interest. It gives the employer way more time to just keep hammering with anti-union propaganda. I heard from a worker the other day that actually quit because they were just so tired of dealing with it. They said it felt like a psyop, like they were just constantly bombarded with the propaganda, with the managers, just with the text messages. Their phones are blowing up all the time. If there was a 2-week election, I think it would look a lot different. Amazon has had such a long time to hammer home these messages, and people just get sick of it too. Like folks have things to do. They don't want to have to think about this all the time. They want to go to work, go home, live their lives, and they're just being hammered for, I think this has been 7 weeks. That is a really long time. And, I hope that it doesn't hurt the vote here, but it is, drawing things out never helps. Voluntary recognition is always ideal, but if you're gonna go for an election, keep it snappy,
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's also money to be made. There's a lot of incentives to drag it out as well. So, okay, so the PRO Act is there's an opportunity here to transform how this country deals with labor, to remove right to work states, the ability for a state to be right to work, which is exactly, what has happened in the South, which happened in the West. And it's in a lot of these states where you've seen the red state revolts, where, educators have organized in these red states and fought and won, or $15 minimum wage wins in Florida or whatever. You're seeing there's an appetite on the ground. This was before the pandemic. I kind of want to shift gears because I feel one aspect of the economy that is not connected to labor as much, even though it should be, and it's completely intersectional, is women have universally suffered the most during this pandemic and the economy, both things, whether it's managing your home or just taking on the burden of the economy, that's in a spiral. Yet, and the workforce, by the way, overwhelmingly female, that is tied to labor, whether it's frontline workers being teachers, at-home care workers, healthcare workers, flight attendants. I mean, we could go through the list of all of these different unionized workforces that have been on the front lines that are majority women made up and women led. Yet somehow this doesn't connect. I don't understand why, like, Biden is not saying we support our frontline workers, which means we support unions. Oh, by the way, and like, this is a feminist issue.
It's a Women's History Month right now, right? So we might get a couple mentions, might get a couple cursory mentions, but I mean, the disconnect is so ingrained. Yesterday was one of the equal pay days, right? And there's all this celebration around it, but like, even that equal pay day, that's only for some women. That leaves behind Black workers, brown workers, Indigenous women, like Asian women. Like, there's just a lack of intersectional focus in general. And I mean, even like what you're talking about, the pandemic, like there has been a lot of reporting about, this is hurting women, this is hurting women. It's specifically hurting Black and brown women. Like, these are the details that are being left out because people, maybe they're not paying enough attention, or they don't care enough, or, I can't ascribe motives to anybody else, right? But it's disappointing because, like you said, the working class is majority women. It's women of color specifically who are leading these charges. And I think that the movement needs to be making a greater effort to, spotlight that and show that that's actually happening and give actual resources and actual support to efforts like this. I mean, the effort here in Bessemer is being led by Black women. Like one of the most vocal public faces of the campaign, Jennifer Bates, she just turned 49. She's a middle-aged Black woman who comes from a labor background. She's been a union worker before, and now she's trying to lift up the rest of her coworkers. This is the kind of story that we see, and there just isn't as much acknowledgement of it. And you're right, it's a problem. They should probably.
I mean, look at the $15 minimum wage, for instance. Over the past 10 years, it was led by women of color who, I'll never forget the marches across New York City, shutting down New York City, downtown, just seeing these fast food workers in particular, moms, right? They were trying to change the narrative that, no, it's not all teenagers. That was 10 years ago. But that was a women-led movement. And it boggles my mind how somehow I wish more unions would lean on the fact that it is a feminist issue. So when they are pressuring the Biden administration to support the $15 minimum wage, or pressuring Kyrsten Sinema or Joe Manchin to support the $15 minimum wage, it's not just coming from a place of working people need a living wage. It's union members are the advocates for this. You're the unions that support you, Joe Manchin, still is mind-boggling to me. But also women, it is sexist for you not to support the $15 minimum wage. Can we just say that? It is sexist for you to not support the PRO Act. If you're for frontline workers, show it.
There's so much rhetoric around, the family, hardworking, hardworking this, hardworking that. That leaves out single mothers, that leaves out women in general who are having to deal with these extra care, like child care or elder care, just the mountains of invisible labor that most women have to put up with. And it is a feminist issue. And I think there's just such a this reticence in, I guess, mainstream politics to touch anything that's too, that's the feminists are into that. We can't get too into that. But it just comes down to the way that politicians flatten identities into even talking about the Republicans, talking about, the hardworking Americans, the blue collar working class. Who do you think is in the working class? Who do you think is wearing these blue collars? It's not just and all these white collar bosses trying to cosplay that they're from the working class because they saw a hammer once. It just shows this fundamental disconnect between, what these people that have these platforms have this power and the people who, are just being used as tools and used as props. Seeing Kyrsten Sinema talking about, how women need to, have a higher wage and women this, women that. Okay, well, we just saw what you did, girl. You clearly don't care enough. Yeah, rainbow braid over here. It's just, there's such a resistance to take even the most basic intersectional analysis to anything, and to admit that the workers, the working class, this block that you've imagined in your head is not just the guys like my dad who are white guys in a hard hat who could go Trump or Bernie depending on how they feel. That's not what the working class looks like anymore. That's not who you need to be paying attention to or taking care of or trying to support.
But that was who they were trying to woo post 2016. The narrative out of Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin was that sliver of white working class men were sexist, right? That was their whole thing, that they were sexist, and that's why they went to Trump. But turns out, the margins were actually a lot smaller this time, granted more voters in those swing states that we mentioned. And it may not have been about sexism. It may have just been about you're focusing on a group of working class people that we shouldn't be focusing on. Maybe work on expanding the electorate, which is arguably what Biden did do to win. He got more votes, but the margins were smaller in these states, and he still lost to those voters, the white working class men.
And if you're going to talk about union members in this country, what a union member looks like, it is a far more typical example of a union worker to talk about a Black woman who works as a home healthcare aide or a hotel cleaner who is a member of, SIU or Unite Here, who just got laid off and lost her income in the pandemic. It's so frustrating. I mean, that's the kind of thing I'm going to be writing about in the book that I still need to start writing. But it's just this lack of understanding and lack of care when it comes to actually understanding who you're talking about, who you're trying allegedly to fight for. It all comes down to what is the most convenient politically instead of what's actually happening. And that's how we keep getting into all these messes. And that's why, one of the reasons why it's so important to pass this PRO Act, because, legislation that getting it on the books, even if it's flawed, even if it's not perfect, that is a start. And I mean, at this point, we're down so bad, like we need a start.
Right. I mean, if the centrists can use identity against working people, then working people should use identity against their narrative, because you can't sit there and say hashtag support our frontline workers, and then as the economy is collapsing, the most basic necessities. Yeah,
the hashtags don't really put food on the table or pay your rent. Like like performative tweets from senators don't actually do anything but distract the people who have time to sit and look at Twitter. Like, the Amazon workers at the facility here are not seeing these pathetic attempts to dunk by like Dave Clark or whoever's running the Amazon propaganda networks. Like, they don't see that, but we do. Like, so we'll dunk on you while they're doing the real work.
Exactly. Well, Kim Kelly, love having you on. Love talking labor with you anytime. We're a labor-friendly show, as you know. So keep up the amazing work. Stay safe. Hope you steer clear of any tornadoes. It's my greatest fear. I have a reoccurring nightmare. I've had it since I was a kid. It's like I know in a different life I probably died of a tornado. I twice a year at least, I have horrifying tornado dreams. So when I hear things like this, I start to like develop the sweat. So stay safe.
Oh my gosh, it seems to be a little calmer now. We'll see. I mean, cross fingers. There's a basement.
I was gonna say, it better be a basement. What's the evacuation strategy? Do we need to walk you through this?
I just want to know when Jeff Bezos bought his weather machine. That's my biggest question.
First, he had to damage the environment, the ecosystem, and that's the joke about Amazon. He literally wiped it out. No.
I just have questions, but
Kim, thank you so much for joining us. You appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Stay safe. All right, we will be right back with our fabulous Thursday panel. Rabb in the house with Arun Chaudhary. Be right back.
Your eye is this white shaded area. Right off the bat, the thing that should catch your eye is this white shaded area over Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. This is where the Storm Prediction Center has issued a high risk severe weather forecast. It's where there is the greatest likelihood of tornadoes and hail. This is not common for them to issue a high risk. Another thing that we don't always see is on this map, a Pds Tornado Watch. PDS stands for Particularly Dangerous Situation, and not all watches come with a PDS label. For those of you who live where the dash lines are on this map, this is what's called a hatched area. As the hours go by, more potential of seeing supercells capable of producing multiple tornadoes of EF2 strength or greater, and they could be long tracked, leading to a lot of destruction. Now here is a look at the future radar forecast as we keep going forward, where these nasty storms are going to visit multiple states across the southeast, mid-Atlantic, and beyond. There's still going to be a chance of storms on Friday, but in comparison, things will settle down considerably. But the flood threat will continue from all of the rain that fell across the region. Lastly, just another quick reminder to have your shelter spot picked out in your home. The most interior room is best, away from outside walls and windows. Right off the bat, the thing that should catch your eye is this white shaded area over Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee.
Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. It is Thursday, and we have Rep. Rabb representing the 200th District of Pennsylvania with his 200th District seal behind, or logo behind him. Of course, Rep. 200th District is Northwest Philadelphia, and then we have Arun Chaudhary live from Berlin. He is, of course, a political filmmaker known for being the creative director for Bernie Sanders 2016 and was the first videographer. I'm not looking at my notes. First videographer for President Obama. Is that right? Did I get it right? It's only been a year.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
That's right.
All right, guys. So President Biden had his first press conference just minutes ago, and I want to share a few notable moments from the press conference. He answered questions. Good news. So Fox News can now shut up and focus on Dr. Seuss again or something, or him falling down the stairs. But he does answer a question that we are all concerned with. It's about the filibuster, which is a great excuse for him not to pass some transformative pieces of legislation. Let's roll that clip.
President Barack Obama said he believed the filibuster was a relic of the Jim Crow era. Do you agree?
Yes.
If not, why not abolish it if it's a relic of the Jim Crow era?
Successful electoral politics is the art of the possible. Let's figure out how we can get this done and move in the direction of significantly changing the abuse of even the filibuster rule first. It's been abused from the time it came into being by an extreme way in the last 20 years. Let's deal with the abuse first.
It sounds like you're moving closer to eliminating the filibuster. Is that correct?
I answered your question.
You also just made some
abuse of the filibuster rule. Not that the filibuster rule was a run.
I mean, to me, look, we can bring in a body language expert or whatever nonsense people do or whatever, but clearly her follow-up caught him a bit by surprise. He was like, oh yeah, that's right. Well, if that's true, then why wouldn't you get rid of it? Caught him by surprise. And I think he got over the skis a little bit on how eager he is to get rid of the filibuster as a whole. I think, he came to the podium having the kind of half measure they've decided on, which is the revert back to the good old filibuster of olden times rather than the modern filibuster. And I think that's all he's prepared to give. And he kind of just leaned out a little too heavily and didn't know the answer to the question.
I wasn't aware that there was a filibuster incrementalist reform bill. Were you, Representative Rabb?
No, yeah. So, when you have an institutionalist like Biden, like he was in the Senate for decades, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to respect the institution, but to do it honor is to make it better, right? And to understand what are the structural changes that need to happen so that that deliberative body can be its best self. And, the challenge I have with Biden, I've always had this issue is, I think he's more about honoring the institution as it is as what it could be. And so if he's talking about the art of the possible, I'd like to know what he thinks is possible in terms of institutional changes. And, I've mentioned before, my first job out of college was working as a legislative aide for Carol Moseley Braun, who was the first Black woman senator in U.S. history. And when she first she came to the Senate floor one day in a pantsuit. This was 93. And the sergeant of arms came up to her and said, "Well, you can't be here." And she's looking at this person like they're crazy. And he said, "Oh, well, women have to wear skirts and dresses." And she just gave this incredulous look like, "You're not really going to make me leave the Senate floor. That's not happening." And that changed in that instant. That dissolved. That awful tradition, absurd tradition, dissolved in a moment. Because nobody was going to tell her she's going to have to change her clothes to do her job, and rightfully so. Later on, before I left her office, she actually did a standing filibuster to reject the patent that is ceremonially given every X years to the daughters of the Confederacy. It's some kind of honorific that the Senate bestows on them. And she's like, "What? No. I can't allow that to happen as a Black person. That's absurd." But it had always been done. So irrespective of how many liberals, had preceded her, it took a Black woman to say, "Why are we doing this?" And, I think the same can be asked of Joe Biden. Like, just because you have a reverence for this institution, what supersedes that reverence? Meaningful change. And that requires meaningful action. And this is a moment where there's almost unanimity around the racist origins and use of the filibuster. And if he wants to go bold, then he needs to start with his revered institution.
And where this becomes super sort of not cute and scary is that, like, if Donald Trump didn't teach us that running a country by custom and sort of familiar, wink and nod rule isn't a good idea, you got to write it all down and take care of it. To have people already being like, "Yeah, but it's okay if we negotiate it this way." It's like, no, the rules are actually written down. This crap is made up. If you really mean it, write it down and let's talk about it. Like, no more of this gentleman's, wink agreements.
Yeah, you're right. Gentlemen's agreements, right? That it is a problematic term in and of itself, but how it is actually absolutely right, because you don't have to write it down because among men. And back in the day, Ted Kennedy was chummy with Jesse Helms and Strom Thurmond when I was there, and when they left work, they were rich white guys. That was not a privilege that my former boss had, or that I have now when I'm in Harrisburg. And when we talk about these rules, I just want to mention one of the things that really shocks and is jaw-dropping among my constituents and other stakeholders when I talk to them about what really happens in their state capital. When they hear about some of these institutional practices, they're just floored. And I say, you can't be a citizen lobbyist. You can't be an effective organizer or someone who's truly engaged if you don't have a requisite amount of civic literacy. And you shouldn't have had to wait this long to hear it from me as a public servant. This should be public knowledge. But I say that prior to this term, this legislative term, all the minority chairs, the Democratic chairs of all the standing committees, all 24 committees in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives were chaired by men, 100% by men. And the response I got normally from men in power was, "Oh, well, it's not because, we're sexist, we're Democrats. It's because of seniority." But no one says, what is the inherent problem with seniority? Because if 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or presently, 30 years ago, women were less viable because they didn't have penises, then that is an indictment of how we decide who gets to run committees. It's seniority. And the second most relevant predictor is your last name.
Okay,
if your surname begins with a Z, you'll never be a committee chair in a large crowd, because it's not expertise, it's not lived experience, it's not formal education, it's none of that. It's seniority and the first letter of your last name.
So I love that you bring this up, because I'm going to skip ahead for a second. Let's talk about Meghan McCain, because she has been going off lately on meritocracy. Yesterday we touched on how with Helen Hong, we touched on how she was concerned that The View has had one person who was Asian, and like we're going, identity politics is ruling everything. So I told a story. We all have stories like this, but this one happened very recently, and my jaw dropped, of someone I know who was very upset during the George Floyd protests, very upset that our country was becoming too identitarian, and he lost a job opportunity one time as a firefighter to a black man. And I said, well, how many people did they hire? Oh, okay, they hired 10 firefighters. I said, so you were the 10th worst white guy and the best. But I'm like, literally, that's all this is about. It's just, you suck, and you wanted that seat at the table, while everybody else who's the best in their space, that is a woman, a person of color, they just want one fucking spot. It's the affirmative action thing, right? All right, let's play this clip of Meghan McCain, because I'm like, why is she on air?
I believe that what makes America exceptional is the fact that we're a meritocracy. I believe.
Nice and quick. I don't know if we have the
Also the
one.
outfit. Yikes.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there.
A lot happening.
Is that what you're starting with, really? After this meritocracy, and you're starting with, what is she wearing?
Well, yeah, because she's quite literally sparkling there and talking about meritocracy like she's the daughter of immigrants who grew up like, in the back stock room, like taking care of business, and that's absolutely not the case. And you find the people who talk about meritocracy the most, whether it's Donald Trump or Meghan McCain, are the people who've inherited the most and who've done the least. Is
it just code for white people? I mean, let's just be real here. I've never heard anybody that is not representing the Republicans or some capitalist farce.
Well, except on St. Patrick's Day. I mean, then it's all about identity politics. It's about being Irish. It's not about being American. It's about being Irish. But wait, I thought we were Americans here. So what's this about Irish? That's very hyphenated reality. What's that about? Everyone on the House floor last week or whenever it was wearing green. I have a colleague, Representative Donna Bullock, who's the chair of the Black Caucus, who just says, look, if you won't if you won't stand up for issues for Black women and wear colors or speak up, then I'm not wearing green on St. Patrick's Day. Like it's got to go both ways. Because we had a former chair of the Black Caucus in Pennsylvania who wore West African garb for one holiday or another on the House floor, and they said it was a costume and she had to change. So if it's
who said it was a costume? Who decides these things?
The Speaker of the House, who have been Republicans for most of the last 3 decades. So so it was a costume if it's from continental Africa, but if it's of European extraction, then it's okay. And when they say, if you're complaining so much, random Black person, why don't you just go, right? Well, let's just put it back on them, which is what I had fun doing during the Obama era. Was you don't like how this country is going? Go back to Europe. Like everything is supposed to be wonderful. I mean, the foundational elements of Western, quote unquote, Western civilization is so great. Go back to the motherland, to the fatherland, and enjoy yourself, and leave this rotting country to the mud races or whatever.
Figure out what 16th of your biology you're going to go to. Pick Norway. Pick whatever. Exactly. Sorry, Ron. Go ahead.
No, I was saying the reality of the situation is that every person of color, every marginalized community, every immigrant family, especially I can speak to this, like you grow up with that hustle that, you have to be the best, which is the same thing that drives the meritocracy, but also knowing, and the system doesn't know you anything and is probably rigged a bit against you. So you're going to have to deal with that. But the answer isn't to take your ball and go home. The answer is just you do what you got to do anyway. And that is something that just, I don't know how it would have been, so it's not fair to say to her, but that obviously is not something that is instilled from the kind of upbringing she has had, where you have to hold those two realities in the same time, which is you've got to run through the finish line like there is a finish line there, knowing that the system, doesn't particularly care to hold you up.
I mean, there really is. I have this experience with her, knowing her. I was born in Tucson, Arizona. She was born in Arizona. We would meet up in New York and be in green rooms. And And, generally speaking, she was a more reasonable Republican that I would go on air with, who was much, I think she's gone a little out there for her career, but she was of the people that I would debate on air. We could go off air and she would talk about abortion and be very reasonable about it. I don't know where she stands now. With that being said, let's talk about the two courses in life. By no means, I am privileged. Let me make it very, very clear. I have my own privileges, but two courses in life: immigrant, grandchild, working class background, whatever. Her course in life. We both had media careers. I decided to go the progressive path because of my background. She stayed in her role because of her background and her name, and her media career has. I'm on YouTube. But it is a really important thing to keep in mind. She has excelled. We know our ratings. They were the same. That's not how meritocracy works, Meghan McCain. And I am an example of why that doesn't work that way. You and I have had similar courses in our lives, yet different outcomes for many, many reasons. And it's worse for people who are less privileged than me. I'm perfectly aware of that. But we have to call those things out, even in these spaces, which are extremely privileged, the media spaces. So I want to talk about Republicans for a second, because first off, I want to do a segment. You just inspired me, Rabb, to do a segment with a bunch of lawmakers regularly talking about the ridiculous things that happen in legislatures. You come in with so much information about what Republicans say on the floor today in 2021 that I don't think they could say in Congress, although there's some kooky ones in Congress right now. It's jaw dropping to see the texture of our legislatures across the country. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so in Biden's briefing, he talked about the future of the Republican Party.
Oh, yeah.
And do you believe you'll be running against former President Trump?
Oh, come on. I don't even think about I have no idea. I have no idea whether there'll be a Republican Party. Do you?
And do you believe?
I'm going to go with, based on gerrymandering and the makeup of the legislatures and Koch brothers, I'm going to say, yeah, there's still going to be a Republican Party. What are your bets?
2022,
What's that?
And they're favored in 2022 for good reasons to retake the House National.
Yeah.
Rabb, do Republicans exist in Pennsylvania, a place that everybody thinks is this blue state? Or sort of?
Yeah, we lost 3 seats in this last election cycle, so they're even more powerful now. But they're struggling in the sense that there has been an exodus from their party because of all the Trumpism. And the other thing is, for gerrymandering in Pennsylvania, we're one of the top 3 worst, most gerrymandered states that have been gerrymandered to the benefit of the Republican Party specifically, with some notable exceptions for urban white Democrats. But that's probably another situation that we should talk about, is that in Pennsylvania, there's a 5-person commission. It's the 4 floor leaders in the Pennsylvania General Assembly, and the 5th person has to be unanimously selected by those 4. So they rarely agree on who that 5th person is. So the state Supreme Court gets to choose who the 5th is, and the state Supreme Court leans 5-2 Democrat. So Republicans are in a position where they're going to have to play nicely to make sure that 5th person is better than whoever the state Supreme Court selects, which means that gerrymandering, or rather redistricting, by the end of this year could be of at least incremental benefit to the Commonwealth, which would inure to the benefit, I imagine, of Democrats somewhat. But the fact that this process is not an independent commission is deeply problematic. But how folks operate from state to state, it's not a national thing. It's from state to state, which is why people really need to know who their state lawmakers are, because so much of what impacts our lives is decided on the state level. And I remind people, slavery was, a state law. In Pennsylvania, it was legal for a husband to rape his wife up until very recently, our lifetimes. And now's an extension of patriarchy codified under state law, on and on and on. In Pennsylvania, if you are queer, you are a second-class citizen. You can be fired for being gay. and it's perfectly legal outside of any of the blue bubbles, about 36 blue bubbles across the state. But if I'm driving and I'm queer and I'm driving with my partner from Philly to Harrisburg and I stop in a little town and we're holding hands, they don't have to serve us. I can't get a room. It's all legal in Pennsylvania. State laws matter.
So the big question I have, and I think a lot of people in our generation, younger, have is clearly Republicans have, and this is what the opening of the show is about, was they've been masters at playing with the electoral laws across this country, whether it's gerrymandering or as the Democrats pull out of state parties and unions have been attacked, the state level legislatures have been taken over across this country, where like Democrats are like didn't exist. There's no parties. Like oh, want to run as a Democrat in Wyoming? Find the Democratic Party. Find it on the number doesn't work. It hasn't worked for 30 years. So these things have all happened over the last 3-4 decades. To protect understanding that the Republican Party, at least the ideologies, have been dying. There's a new brand now that is reviving a little bit of some young people, but it's not enough. We know mathematically it is not enough, given the millennial generation being the largest in history, most diverse in history, and definitely the most progressive. Gen Z on another, they're going to be, organizing from holograms. I don't know what they're going to be doing from. So is this just a timing thing? At what point is and Arun, I'm going to go to you for this. At what point does the generation start to catch up so fast that even these rules, with little reforms in the legislature, one outpaces the other? Does that make sense? Arun?
It makes sense to some extent. I mean, I think in a gigantic holistic sense of eventually, aren't the people who disagree going to die? The answer is yes. We will see, we will see a massive party realignment when we see, the generations over the next 10 years start to shift. That is true. However, the demographics, however, all this, you also do need leadership, and we need somebody, and they probably have to be a Democrat who is willing to dig into some huge things, like making federal standards for elections. I think most no one's horrified by the idea of this, the idea that you would have one standard federal thing for elections. Anyone you ask is like, oh, that's a good idea. And most people are in fact shocked to find out that there's not, that there's no actual right to vote even enshrined in the Constitution. The thing is so vague about all of this. So again, the theme of this show, right? Let's stop being ambiguous about this stuff and write it down. We just need people who are willing to make that a hill to die on, because how you vote and how you represent this country is a hill worth dying on.
And Democrats are now seeing this. I mean, there are plenty of states. New York is a perfect example. It had the lowest turnout in the next to most voter restrictive laws, next to Louisiana, just a couple of years ago. And then finally, it was enough. And other Democrats, incumbents, were like, all right, we're willing to suspend our incumbent protection program, because that's essentially what it is, to have voting reforms. And I feel with this new legislation that protects the voting rights, there's an opportunity here for Chuck Schumer in a hearing yesterday over this, which we said in our open, it was a hill he's willing to die on. And it's just gotten so bad that even the worst Democrats are like, all right, it's time. Do you feel that way, Rabb?
Yeah. And, Pennsylvania is a really good example, because right before the pandemic, we had a bipartisan bill widely supported by Republicans that removed we created no excuse voting, right? Essentially voting by mail. That was a non-controversial bill that was enacted into law. And then 3 months later, we had the pandemic, and then Republicans realized how this could benefit their opponents so much more. And so since then, they've been trying to undo the very thing they promoted. And look, we see what happens in Utah. Utah has had vote by mail exclusively, I believe, for decades. It's a pretty red state.
Damn
somehow, right? This is, this is a farce. But once people are used to having certain liberties and certain options, regardless of political ideology, they want to keep it. I think it's part of the human experience. I don't know if you want to make it the American experience, but certainly when folks like something and it's afforded to them and it works for them, they don't really want to give it up.
Get your hands off my Obama. Get your hands off of my Medicare, whatever it was.
Right,
exactly.
Right. Government, get your government hands
that's
off of my Social Security. Right.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I want to wrap with on this topic. Mitch McConnell has been talking about this specific topic. Shocker. That he says that states are not engaging in trying to suppress voters whatsoever. What if, like, do you believe this? Let's play this clip.
The turnout in the 2020 election was the highest since 1900. States are not engaging in trying to suppress voters whatsoever. This is clearly an effort by one party to rewrite the rules of our political system. The turnout in the...
This is what's so... Free market, don't want regulation, except for voting.
Right. We talk, who was the person, Bobby Jindal, he was talking about his dad saying, this is the greatest country in the world. You can go into a store and you have so many different cereals or something like that. Like, this is the reductionist, Republican
Smirnoff kind of take on it.
Exactly. Right. So, but when it comes to opportunities to vote, somehow, we have to have a monopolistic nanny state. How about that? We use their own term against them and tells us what we can and cannot do. In Pennsylvania, you had to get an excuse, a note from your mommy if you were not able or interested in voting on election day during this, this arbitrary 13-hour period until we changed that law for 2020. And, as soon as it seems like it's expanding the electorate and increasing voter turnout, that's what's pissing off my Republican colleagues. And, so what we have to break that down to, and the same applies to the Electoral College and people on a bipartisan level saying we either have to abolish it or bypass it. My very first bill when I got into office was the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact bill. And that was brought up by Republicans initially. And if we can get past the Electoral College, that means that more people will have their votes counted, which means that it will be more proportional to the diversity of the electorate. And that's a powerful thing on a generational level. I think that's good in terms of geographic diversity, ethnic diversity, age diversity, and so forth. But we have to understand that the reason they're pushing up and the reason they're comfortable with this hypocrisy is they know that all they have is a dying demography, and that anyone who they believe is outside of that standard kind of profile is the enemy.
Good luck with that, Arun.
Yeah, good luck with that, because things aren't always sort of equal in the way that they work, and their ability to sort of throw these things and suppress, targeted demographics of Democratic voters are effective. And to counter them, you need to win elections in which you don't do that, because you can't run on that then. And so you end up in this really horrible, vicious circle. Sometimes, like when you look at something like campaign finance reform, you're tempted to say, you know what, let's just deregulate and have money go from everywhere. And at least that way, it's coming from everywhere. You're almost tempted here to be like, I wish Democrats were better at suppressing Republican votes so that until we ban it, there was a little parity, because, we're just saying that's wrong while it's happening. And it's not a good feeling. You're on the ropes just getting beat up.
Well, it doesn't, listen, Joe Biden won because he got more votes this elections than ever in history. But the margin in those swing states, as I've said on the show today and many times before, was smaller than that with Hillary Clinton. But the only reason he won was because the electorate was expanded, because there were more voters for both presidential candidates than ever in history. And so, that was Bernie Sanders' strategy, definitely in 2016. An aspect of that in 2020 was to expand the electorate. But you also have to have your base.
Rove strategy too,
Yep.
A lot of smart people. Yeah.
It's not rocket science. It's just, do you want to win? And that's ultimately the question. Rep Rabb, Arun Chaudhary, two people who know politics well, understand winning very well. Always a pleasure having you on the show on Thursdays. You do. I mean, we've probably had
I
more.
know. We're
Arun's
lefties,
had.
though. We lose a lot.
Rep Rabb has won basically.
He's a winner.
He's a winner.
Make that guy senator.
Yeah, I like that idea. Maybe you should run for Senate.
You guys are killing me.
It's a spicy race. I think there's some debate over who's on the left in that Senate race. I feel like there's room for a leftist to come in. Just throwing that out there.
Primaries matter.
Primaries matter. Very important. All right, guys. Always a pleasure. Have a wonderful Thursday, and we'll see you next week. And to everybody else, let's do these shout outs. We've got JKR Dozer. It's JKR Dozer. Sending love. Thank you so much. And Jason AFC83 subscribed for 1 month at tier 1 yesterday. Thank you. And Midi Doctors gifted a month at tier 1. That's so sweet of you. To Sad Hap 20 today. A Difficult Truth gave out a tier 1 tier 1 to community sub gift. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. And Pete from Oakland says, incredible and chilling opener as always. Thank you. P.S. When does the next round of books go out? Great question. Should be soon. The publisher distributes the books. If you guys don't know about our book club, we have this great book club that we launched in January, and we've partnered up with Verso Books and Haymarket Books. I think we have a few more that we're going to be partnering up with. I just finished up an interview. This was a book from a few weeks ago, but we had, you have to schedule with all the authors and everything. An amazing book on reparations and redeeming the promise of reparations. It's called Repair. It's by Catherine Franke. It was an incredible conversation. The book is such an easy read. It's really like 160 pages. I read it in an afternoon, or 150 pages. Read it in an afternoon. Great conversation. I definitely recommend you check it out. That'll be going up this week, that conversation. And then if you are part of the book club, you already know about Capital is Dead. Is This Something Worse? We had our interview with Mackenzie Wark go up this week. She's brilliant, really broke my mind and freaked me out about where we're going in terms of capital and the new form of capitalism, or is this something different? Definitely go check it out. The Nomiki Show Patreon account, patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. We have 3 levels, 1 book a month, 2 books a month, 4 books a month. You should be getting the book soon. I will find out. I'm also on the distribution list. So as soon as I get it, usually everybody else gets it, and I will give you that update. But if you want to know the calendar, we have put it up. So for the next few months, our calendar of books. It's exciting, very good selections. And sometimes you get early access to books too for the book club because of this relationship we have with Verso and Haymarket, 2 extraordinary publishers that we're grateful to work with. All right, everybody, let me see. Did I miss anything? Thanks to everyone on Twitch for getting our first level 1 hype train going. Some guy just says, hi, Nomiki, I smashed the like button. Love your show. Great content. Thank you, some guy. Everybody smash that like button. Share on social media. We're going to be shifting some stuff around the show soon. Not too much, just like a little bit here and there. Definitely want to get the word out. As you know, we have extraordinary guests, great deep conversations, all within an hour and a half, a few times a week. I think that's digestible. I like to listen to podcasts, briefly on my ride, on my walk, whatever. So if you can share your experience watching the show, please do. We got to get the word out. Thank you to Midi Docs and Mario for working those algorithms. Huge thank you to our YouTube moderators, Bob C, Choke in the Orb, and Chuck Diesel. And always thank you to Dorian Sapiens, A Difficult Truth, Nightbot, Our Means, and Nug Wrangler on Twitch for keeping the chat rooms troll free. We will see you tomorrow for Femme Friday. Same time, same place. And as always, stay in solidarity.